Introductions by members. Madam Clerk.
Introduction of bills.
Member for Chilliwack-Kent.
Mr. Speaker, I move that a bill entitled United Church of Canada Amendment Act 2021, standing in my name on the order paper, be introduced and read a first time now. The United Church of Canada was incorporated by an Act of the Federal Parliament in 1924. Certain rights and powers, specifically with respect to property, of the United Church of Canada and United Church congregations in British Columbia are governed by the United Church of Canada Act, which was enacted in 1924 and amended once in 1927. In 2015, the United Church of Canada's 42nd General Council, the national governance body, adopted a motion to initiate a consultative process with congregations across Canada called a remit process. The question at issue was the restructuring of the national church from a 4-court structure to a 3-council structure. The remit was undertaken and the results of the remit were in favor of a restructuring. The remit and the resulting restructuring were confirmed by the United Church of Canada's 43rd General Council on July 22, 2018. This restructuring and governance modernization process required amendments to the Federal Act and now requires concurrent amendments to the Provincial Act in British Columbia, as has been sought in other provinces. Specifically, this United Church of Canada Amendment Act 2021 amends certain definitions to allow for the new 3-council structure and amends a certain section of the Schedule A to the Act, the Trusts of Model Deed, to reflect the changes in governing bodies that have oversight over congregations on matters of property. The Act is nearly a century old, and to preserve its integrity, the proposed amendments modify only the bare minimum required to effect the change in the governance structure of the United Church of Canada.
Members, a vote is about to take place. Those who are participating remotely, have your voting cards ready. The question is first reading of the bill. Those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Those who oppose indicate nay. Motion carried. Members, pursuant to Standing Order 105, the bill stands referred to the Select Standing Committee on Parliamentary Reform, Ethical Conduct, Standing Orders and Private Bills. Madam Clerk.
Orders of the day.
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Chair. In this House, I call the estimates of the Ministry of Finance, followed by the estimates of the Legislative Assembly and the officers of the Legislature. In Section A, I call the estimates of the Ministry of Health, and in Section C, I call the estimates of the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure.
Committee Chair.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Be it resolved that a sum, vote number 26, be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $307,466,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of the Ministry of Finance, Ministry Operations to 31st March 2022.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Peace River South.
Thank you, Chair. Was just waiting to see if the Minister was going to start off, but I guess we'll just jump right into it. Only have a few more days worth of questions for the Minister. I don't know if I'll have time to get through them all, though. You know, it's I hear the disappointment that the Minister has as well, in the fact that I won't have enough time to get through all of the questions that I have. But in saying that, I want to jump into a few specific points today, and I have a colleague from Richmond North Centre who will join us in a moment. But I just want to set the stage here, and this topic is around the speculation and vacancy tax. I want to talk about that a little bit. It's been around for a couple of years. Obviously, when the government brought this in, it was really about, I think the way it was presented was about speculators. It was really targeting a lot about foreign money that might be coming in and helping curb or shape the supply and demand and raising the costs of homes, and homes being used for a speculative purpose. Unfortunately, what we're seeing now in this year specifically is we have a lot of British Columbia residents, people who live in their homes and for different reasons due to the format and the application criteria that this government has put in and has not really changed. It's now targeting a lot of British Columbians, people who have lived in their homes for years, people who have owned their homes in some cases for decades, some people who have now vacant land that is being charged a speculation tax on vacant land. I want to read one quote in just to kind of set the stage here. You know, some of the things that we are hearing, and I know the Minister is hearing these issues as well, and why we're pushing, challenging, asking the Minister to really take a closer look at this tax. What the intent was to begin with, and then also on that, is it still achieving those goals, or is it actually disproportionately now affecting British Columbia residents who, through no fault of their own, are being forced to pay a tax that most people, most rational, I think, people that look at the situation and that those people are in, they should not be having to pay that tax. We have a multitude of examples that we could present in this House, and a lot of them have a similar issue, which is people are living in their houses, or because of where they receive some of their funds, they have to pay a spec tax. I have one from a woman in North Vancouver who is very distraught because she's on a pension, but because she moved to British Columbia and her pensionable earnings are coming from Alberta, she cannot show on the documentation that her revenue comes from BC, so now she's a speculator. These are the kind of weird loopholes that I think the ministry needs to take a closer look at, so we're not negatively impacting and penalizing British Columbians. But I do want to read this one. I've got pages and pages, but I'm only going to read one for now. And this is a quote from a person in Nanaimo. "I am disgusted. I just completed my speculation tax forms, and I have found out that you are making me pay a speculation tax on a bare piece of land. Citizens of BC, we are citizens of BC. We're told that the speculation tax was to deter foreign investors from purchasing homes and leaving them vacant and driving up the prices of real estate. That is how this government presented it. But now, because I have a piece of property that I have been trying to sell for a number of years, a vacant piece of land, the NDP government is now making me pay a tax. This is sneaky, it's a dirty cash grab, and what an underhanded way of handling this tax and penalizing British Columbians. You are targeting the middle class and you are making us suffer. Now, that was Catherine from Nanaimo. And as the minister can appreciate, I have stacks and stacks of these, and most of these have been delivered to the minister and to her ministry. But I've yet to hear the minister really talk about how they're going to look at changes. So I'm going to give her that opportunity today to maybe talk about how they're going to maybe relook at this tax, or on the record say, no, we're satisfied with it and we're going to keep it exactly the way it is, which will continue to penalize British Columbians. But maybe before I turn it over to my colleague, I will ask one question just to start this off. How much is collected for this budget cycle earmarked to be collected? So how much was collected in 2020-21 budget from the spec tax, and how much is budgeted to be collected in the 21-22 budget on the speculation and vacancy tax?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. When we introduced the speculation and vacancy tax, our province was at a very significant point of real estate crisis, and moderation of the market was very long overdue. It had been ignored for far too long, and certainly the next generation, I believe the member's children, and I think the member in fact was talking about I think it was his daughter who's living now in Vancouver, and the challenges of finding an appropriate place to live and how significant that has been for far too long. And so we brought in a speculation and vacancy tax, part of our 30-point housing plan, to help make housing more affordable, to make sure that we're addressing sort of the speculation in the market. Some might call it holding on to land in order to wait for the prices to go up so that you could cash out, so to speak. And so in order to help incent those to either, if there was a place to live on the property, to at least rent it out, or if it was vacant land, to start developing it, or sell it to someone who would develop it, because that was hurting people, it was hurting our children, and it was hurting certainly the next generation, and they're still continuing to hurt. I think the member would agree that they're continuing to be challenged with housing. So it's with that in mind, but we also certainly recognize that speculation by those not paying taxes here was a particular problem. And so we structured this tax to address that as well. So the intent was to turn empty houses into homes for people, to discourage real estate speculation and ensure that homeowners who report the majority of their income outside of Canada pay their fair share of taxes. So it was designed in all of that capacity. It exempts 99.9% of British Columbians. It's a very small percentage of British Columbians that do get captured here. And after reviewing the data from the second year and from hearing from local leaders in communities and those impacted by the housing crisis, we made some additional improvements to build on the success of our first 2 years. And so making some adjustments has been a part of how we have operated as a government. And so I think that's, and I just, in fact, tabled a report yesterday, today's Thursday, yesterday, lose track, about some other feedback. We consult with the mayors, and so that report was tabled yesterday as part of understanding the impacts in communities. And so we continue that process, and we will continue that process. Now, what I will share, the specifics of the member's question was wanting to understand how much was collected in 2021 and how much is budgeted for this year. So in 2021, in the first quarterly report, the revenue forecast was revised from $185 million to $80 million, reflecting a decline in observed revenue. We saw certainly the filings, because of the timing of when people file and when budget's done and when public accounts comes in, there's a bit of a challenge around the timing. But certainly what we're seeing is that more and more people are choosing not to pay the tax. They're choosing to rent out their homes. And we saw thousands and thousands of livable units come onto the market so that people can rent a home. So instead of them sitting empty, collecting dust, we are seeing that when we actually changed the rate from 0.5% of assessed value in the first year of the tax, we didn't see as much rental come onto the market. And when it went to 2% for foreign owners, it had a behavioral effect, and we saw certainly more homes come available for people like the member's daughter, so that they're actually lived in. And that's made a difference. And so as a result, we are recognizing that there are lower revenues. And we see this as a good thing, and I know that that's really hard for some folks to believe. As a finance minister, we really prefer to see revenues. But in this case, Mr. Chair, this is really about making sure that safety deposit boxes in the sky, are lived in at a minimum. Our rental vacancy rates had been severely challenged in the Lower Mainland, and I know the chair is well aware of that, given his role with the Rental Task Force a number of years ago, and making sure that we were using these investments for a good purpose, and that's so that people can have a place to live. And there's certainly more work to do on that file, but this is making a difference in so many lives.
Member.
Thank you. I'm going to turn things over right now then to my member colleague from Richmond North Centre, and just to give another example of some of the struggles, and I will then, after her, come back to some of the comments. I didn't quite get the full answer from the Minister of what's projected in the budget for 2021. I'll give her an opportunity afterwards to do that maybe, but to the chair, maybe I'll turn things over to him to recognize my colleague.
Sorry, which colleague? Sorry, yes, Richmond North Centre. There you are.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to thank my colleague from Peace River South for giving me my time to talk about my constituents' situation, and knowing that there's so many constituents of my colleagues that have been unfairly taxed by this so-called speculation tax. But before I'm letting the minister know about the plight of my constituent, I'd like to quote a sentence from him in his appeal letter to the ministry dated June 10, 2021. He said, Tony, his name is Tony Chan, I quote him, "If the intent of the tax is to improve the life of British Columbians, then this has failed miserably, and in fact has likely imposed additional hardship to many unsuspecting citizens beside me," end quote. So let me talk a little bit about my constituent, Tony Chan. He is 64 years old. He's a retiree. Tony approached me in March 2020 regarding his speculation tax assessment. He owns and lives in his Richmond townhome for the past 20 years, 2 decades. He has been constantly corresponding with my CA and talking to her, and I talked to him a couple of times for more than half an hour every time. His wife is an American citizen and owns her home in the States. They are not entitled to each other's property, but the ministry has asked him to pay almost $15,000 in speculation tax, in spite of the fact that he lives in his Richmond townhome for the past 20 years. So Tony was married long before this tax was even considered. He has owned his own home like the majority of British Columbians for many years before the so-called speculation tax came to light. Tony cannot direct his wife to not make more money than he does, and he certainly will not divorce her. He cannot simply go out and get a high-paying salary at his age of 64. So how can he afford this $15,000? Tony told me that the only alternative for him is he would be forced to sell his home of 20 years in order to pay an annual tax of $15,000. That should not be required of any average citizen who lives in his own home for two decades. So I really feel for the plight of Tony. So on behalf of Tony, we have asked the Ministry of Finance twice for a reconsideration, but the answers remain the same. So Tony just wrote another letter dated June 10 to appeal the ministry decision. I would really appreciate through the chair that the minister can explain why a British Columbian and a Canadian citizen, not a speculator, has to pay speculation tax when he owns his home and lives there for 20 years. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Finance Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So my understanding is that there is an appeal in progress, so I can't speak to any specific taxpayer. There is, however, an annual review of this tax to see how it's working, to see how we can make it work better, to identify where there might be loopholes. So this is an ongoing process that we are committed to continuing to review. We have a situation where 99.9% of British Columbians do not have to pay this tax. And that's a very important thing for us all to remember, that was how it was constructed, and because it's under this very specific case is under appeal, I can't comment about any specific one taxpayer. Thank you.
Member for Richmond North Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I pass the floor back to my colleague from Peace River South, I just want the minister to know that Tony Chan, in his letter, his appeal letter, he did say, let me quote, your letter, meaning the Ministry of Finance letter, actually acknowledged that this tax is unfair to me, and yet no relief is offered, end quote. So the minister should know that your staff, the minister's staff, admitted that the tax is unfair to my constituent. So I appeal to the minister, she should take a look. I know that it's under appeal, but if this create hardship on my constituent, I'm sure it will create hardship for many other constituents, which is not the intent of this speculation tax at all. I'm sure the minister must fully agree with me. So thank you for the minister's attention and thank you for the time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Member Peace River South.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to my colleague for bringing that example forward. And as she said, there's lots others like that. I'm hoping that the minister, since the minister acknowledged in this specific case, this constituent has appealed, gets what appears to be a form letter back saying, thanks for the appeal, we're not changing our minds. So he's now written to the minister and said, basically, yeah, I'd like to appeal this appeal on the fact that not only a hardship, but it's a perfect example in this case of, I think, the unintended, I would use those words, unintended consequences of the policies that this government put forward around the speculation and vacancy tax. So since the minister's staff appears to be aware of it from the commentary that I heard there, it's my hope then, and my ask, that when we are done here, the minister can direct her staff to maybe look at this one a little bit more closely, and hopefully, if nothing else, report back to my colleague from Richmond North Centre what the process will be, because this constituent has been very active in explaining their hardship, but their concerns with this tax, and I know that the constituent and my colleague would really appreciate this one being looked at a little bit more holistically. So I hope the minister will consider doing that afterwards. I was going to continue on this. I'll come back to talking about the speculation vacancy tax. But, you know, I just want to say, first of all, I'm quite surprised. Here we are in the last day of session. We're in the House on Finance estimates. And while we're in this chamber, the government on the last day, just now, puts on the government website a report from the panel around affordability. This is a panel that was chaired by NDPer Joy McPhail, where the government appointed her to work on this panel to come back with recommendations. I think the minister will agree that since this was just put on the website, I haven't had a chance to look at the entire report. As she was just answering the last question, I was quickly looking at it. But I can tell you I'm quite surprised, Honourable Chair, and I want to bring some things to the attention of the minister. This is a panel that the government has put together around affordability. I get that. But I think it's really important today, since the Premier is not available to answer these questions, that the minister, on behalf of government, I think it's really important that the minister does. Because one of the very first things that this panel is recommending, which goes to the heart of almost what we're talking about right now, whether it's homeowners grant, speculation, vacancy tax, all the different tools that government has that's helping people get into or stay in housing. Let me just say how shocked I am to see some of the first two recommendations that have come forward is to review and eliminate the capital gains tax exemption on principal residences and to phase out and eliminate the homeowner's grant. Those are two of the top recommendations that this panel has put forward. Now, the minister has stood up in this House in the past when we've been debating and talking about these specific issues, especially the homeowner's grant. When we were talking about this, when the changes were made in December, the minister was on the record saying there's no intended changes. We are not doing anything to get rid of the homeowner's grant. The government and the minister's own panel is now recommending they get rid of the homeowner's grant and get rid of the capital gains tax exemption on principal residences. Real easy to solve this today, Mr. Chair, because this goes against pretty well what we've heard in this House. Is the minister able to stand up today and acknowledge, first of all, this report is just out, but that she too would be surprised by those recommendations, since that goes against some of the comments we've heard in this House, and she'll today publicly say that they will not be accepting those recommendations.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think it's important to understand about just who this panel was. I believe it's an expert panel that was put in place before my time as finance minister. I believe it was, I want to say 18 months, 24 months ago. And it was to the previous finance minister federally, Bill Morneau, and to the previous finance minister, it was Carol James, here in this chamber. So there has been a significant change. Chrystia Freeland is now the federal finance minister, and I am here. So this report has come to us to help identify what more we can do in addressing the housing crisis. And And it's not just here in Vancouver. We know that Ontario is having a significant challenge as well. And so the report was delivered to the federal government as well as to our government. And they're an independent group that was tasked to go out and come up with some ideas. I haven't had a chance either to dig into this report, but what I can absolutely assure the member is that we are not interested in making any changes to the homeowner grant. I have said that before, and I am saying that again today. And my understanding is that the federal government has also CMHC has just issued a release that says that they're not interested in making any changes to capital gains either.
Member.
I appreciate that and thank the minister, because we have had that discussion in the House. I wanted to ensure, obviously, as I am just getting the report now, it's one of those surprising things. I know what happens when it comes on the last day of session, when you don't have time to dive into it holistically to look at the rest of it. But of course, that flagged for me right away. But this is one of those things where the Premier and the Minister of Finance, I think, can stand behind their commitment. Obviously, we all in this House want to ensure that we have opportunities for people to get into the housing market. But that also shouldn't come as a penalty to those who have been fortunate enough to already be in the housing market. The Minister has acknowledged in the past when we debated the homeowners grant, so I'm encouraged to hear from the Minister today that they have no intention of accepting those recommendations. I'm paraphrasing what the Minister said, but I appreciate that. With that, Mr. Chair, if I can, I'm going to, through you, hope to acknowledge my colleague from Kelowna West, who has a few questions on a different subject for the Minister.
Happy to acknowledge a member when they rise. Recognizing the member for Kelowna West.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through to the Minister. And I hope that this question, because of the changes that have been made by the government in terms of responsibilities around liquor control, liquor licensing, the LDB, and taxation, there's a very specific, and this is probably something that not necessarily on the Minister or the Minister's staff about taxation. However, when an importation of wine is brought into the province of British Columbia, the CBSA does its job and collects tax, and they see it as they see it as alcohol, and there's a tax that is put on all alcohol imported into the province. So the confusion and the opportunity that is missing or needs to be addressed is that there is laboratories that have developed as part of the wine industry in British Columbia, and from the early days, and I say that meaning when most laboratory work was done in-house, now with the numbers and the number of small wineries, they rely very heavily on a particular company that's set up in Kelowna called Supra Laboratories. They do analysis of work, and of course you will perhaps remember that there are different things that can affect the flavor and taste of wines, and one of them happens to be smoke taint. Now, what happened in the last couple of years in California is that they've been overwhelmed. Their laboratory system is consolidated down to one main specific laboratory, and this particular company went out to attract business into British Columbia, and it is literally hundreds and hundreds of samples that they need to analyze. But the problem is that they're now being assessed as if they're importing wine samples. What Rob O'Brien, who owns this laboratory, is asking for is how do we navigate through the taxation system to find a way for analytical purposes being able to exempt these wines that are coming in for an analysis, they're not for resale, and being able to make it clear, because this confusion which happens around this tax that often gets punted around in government is how can we help Mr. O'Brien find a solution, and other laboratories that have that opportunity to capitalize on the opportunity here in British Columbia all over.
Minister.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank the member for bringing this to my attention. I don't have an answer for him just yet, but I would be helpful because I've got a bunch of different people talking to me, understanding which tax specifically he's speaking to. That would be really helpful.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I threw to the Minister. I think that I can only assume that it's the same tax on any wines that are imported into British Columbia for the sale, whether it's private or through the BCLDB. The taxation, as far as I can recollect, is about 110% of the landed cost. So that tax is assessed if you're bringing it across a land border, you're flying in as a personal importation, it's all the same as far as I know. I just would like to be able to, I wish I could unravel and figure this out myself. I've been confronted with this many times in the fact that I've had an entire lifetime in this business, and it's always complicated. I just pay the tax and don't, bother fighting it. But these guys are trying to make a business out of this and create an opportunity to take well-educated lab technicians and specialists in this area, and it would be great if we could become the leading place in North America for this assessment.
Minister.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And after a bit of bouncing around and trying to figure out what the likely tax is, there is some suspicion that it might be the federal excise tax. But what would be helpful, and I'd like to offer the member, is that perhaps we should talk, outside of this venue to understand more fully what's going on so that we could help navigate the exact tax and the exact department where we can try to problem solve this together. So I want to extend that invitation to the member to reach out so that we could sort this out. And I look forward to learning a little bit more about what this business is doing. It sounds absolutely fascinating, and we'll see how we can be helpful to fix this.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Peace River South.
Thank you, Chair. Before I move on, I just want to go back, maybe if I could for a second, to the report. What is the role of the minister? As she said, it's gone to the federal government. What is the role of the minister then? Does this report go to her directly? Does it go to the Premier? Does it go to Cabinet? Who is the one, and I apologize if the minister already said it in her initial response, but just to have a further discussion on this, because I think it's really important that we get some of this on the record, just for, if nothing else, to ensure that people who might read this report understand the direction that government chooses to go, which we understand is obviously around affordability. But there are, as I mentioned, some recommendations in here at first glance that people could be very worried about, very concerned about. And so I think it's an opportunity just for a respectful dialogue, if I can say it that way, for the minister, so we understand what the minister's role is. And again, I will understandably acknowledge that this took place prior to the minister having the present role that she has, but she's now in the role as finance minister. So is this going to the minister? Has she been briefed already? Has she already been briefed on this document? If so, was she aware of these recommendations, or are there further briefings coming? And then who's going to be having the final decision on what recommendations to consider and how this report will be utilized?
Minister.
Thank you very much. So I think it's important to remember the context again. There's been a significant housing affordability challenge. When we formed government in 2017, we tackled it head on, and early in 2018 we came out with a 30-point plan, the work always continues. We're always looking to do more. And so in September of 2019, it was the Government of Canada and our government commissioned the expert panel on the future of housing supply and affordability to identify additional measures that could build on our investments that we were making and initiatives that were already underway to help more people find affordable housing in British Columbia and in Canada. Frankly, I know that there's some ideas in there that I believe that other governments might be interested in taking a look at. And the expert panel has been chaired by Joy McPhail, and there were other members as well. Jill Atke, Jock Finlayson, Brian McCauley, Sue Paish, and Helmut Pastrick. And these are, well-respected people in their fields. I see the member from Kelowna nodding. These are people who know a little something about this, and I want to thank them. I want to take a moment to thank them for their hard work in engaging with everyone, from the financial sector to the housing sector, recognizing that we all need to be working together to address housing affordability. They did release, the member may not be aware, but they did release in December 2020 a What We Heard report. That was available in terms of understanding what they were hearing, and then they continued to go and do their work. That it was released. The report. I understand what was released earlier today. The Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation was releasing the report because it was a joint report. It requires certainly working with the federal government. I know that the member has been on this side of the House. It's not always easy to coordinate. And so they released a report. My understanding, because I haven't been able to roll up my sleeves, I've been busy preparing for estimates, and so there is a pile on my desk, and it's not just these binders, Mr. Speaker, there's a whole other pile, and that is on a pile. My understanding, in a very cursory review, there's a number of recommendations, and I think it's clear, just from recent economic factors that we're seeing with historically low interest rates and the impact of the pandemic, that we're continuing to see volatility in the market. There is, in some parts of the market, there is a settling out, but in other parts, it's not the case. But we all know, and I think we can all agree, that all orders of government have to work together in order to make it work better. And I keep coming back to, and it rings true for my kids as well, when I heard the member from Peace River talk about his daughter moving to the Lower Mainland and having a hard time finding housing. I agree, and my heart goes out to them, but my heart isn't good enough. We have to be doing more to support this next generation and finding ways that they can find the housing that meets their needs. But more than that they could settle in, whether it's home ownership, into something that they can afford. Even when they have decent jobs, it's really hard for them to do. But I also want to take a moment, if I can, Mr. Chair. Since we launched Homes for BC in 2018, we've made significant progress in some significant key areas. We've cracked down on tax fraud, and we closed loopholes. We have about 30,000 homes of publicly funded homes that are complete or underway, with more to come. Every day I see more and more housing that is affordable coming, that we started building 2 years ago, that is now homes to people, because that's what this is about. It's about people. And with this budget, we're building an additional 9,000 homes for middle-income people. And some of that is home ownership. We're looking at different models in order to make that available for people. We've brought back a number of rental units. 18,000 is what we've been able to, our analysis indicates, because we've implemented the speculation and vacancy tax. And that's made a significant difference to renters being able to ease some of those pressures. Other work that is underway that I'm very proud of, I was the Minister for Municipal Affairs, and we started this work, and I know that under the new minister it will be ably stewarded and we'll see more results, is improving and streamlining the development approval process. And we've certainly heard in some communities, not in all communities, I believe it's in Langford has the fastest turnaround time, but there are other communities that really are very slow. They're very bogged down, and it creates, a tremendous backlog. Not just on government-funded housing, but on the private sector. And that's the number one issue that the private sector has certainly complained about when it comes to building housing is things need to move faster. Time is money, and the faster they can move on getting housing built, the lower the cost, but also the sooner people can move into homes. So these are the kinds of things that we're doing. And in March, we launched a $15 million local government development approvals program, encouraging local governments to look at best practices, innovative ways to support nonprofit housing organizations, developers, and others to deliver, essential housing to people around the province. It's going to take a sustained level, frankly, of action to tackle the crisis. We know it won't be solved overnight. Here's one more piece of us to roll up our sleeves and dig into to see what more perhaps we need to be able to do. We brought in legislation early on to require all local governments to do a housing needs assessment. All local governments have a certain size. Small communities don't need to. They sort of they can count how many homes they have. They don't need perhaps a full assessment. But again, so that we understand what the housing stock is and what anticipated needs are. So we'll certainly be taking a look at this expert panel. They were tasked to go out and find what more should we be doing, where should we be prioritizing, how should we be thinking about what we need to do, because it is critical. It's absolutely critical that we continue to address housing affordability. Our economy depends on it. We've certainly heard from employers who can't find employees because employees can't afford to live in their communities. And the example that I've used before in this House is with the North Shore and the Lower Mainland, particularly when it comes to building housing. They can't find workers because workers tend to only be able to afford to live perhaps in the Fraser Valley or elsewhere, and they don't want to deal with the traffic to come, but there's other projects for them to work on in the Fraser Valley, and so as a result, it's really hard to find workers to work on the North Shore. And so that's really, I think, a problem for all of us to wrap our minds around and to be dedicated to addressing, so that in places like the North Shore, there could be homes that those folks can afford to live in so they don't have to travel for work. So I'm going to take my seat now. I know that there's more that I have to say about this, and I look forward to the next set of questions.
Member for Peace River South.
Well, thank you, Chair, and I have another colleague that will ask a question in a second, but I just want to say for the Minister, of course, we're looking at this report. One of the questions was obviously around some of the specific recommendations. The Minister's already on the record spoken, I assume, on behalf of government, that they're not going to be following through with those recommendations. But I also want to acknowledge, I understand completely when expert panels, if we use that term, and I think it's probably an appropriate term, is put together to come forward with recommendations. But the final decision still lies on government of the day to look at those recommendations and make the determination of whether that's practical on the ground. It's practical in the terms of government's direction they choose to go, and it's also the best interests of the people. I look at the other expert panel for electoral boundaries review. They're going to come forward with a whole bunch of recommendations based on the criteria that government's asked them to look at, but the final decision still comes down to government and the ministry and cabinet whether to accept some, all of the recommendations or the determination around those recommendations. I just want to also, for the record, though, remind the minister that one of the big challenges is supply. I think she's somewhat acknowledged that. Supply is an issue. And we do not want to, in my opinion, humbly say that we create a further issue between renters and homeowners. We shouldn't be penalizing homeowners. What we want to do is incentivize development to allow more renters that choose to become homeowners through accessibility into an affordable housing market. The housing minister, during estimates this session, has already acknowledged that government has only been able to achieve 5% of what they promised around an affordable housing market. The government had announced they were, going off memory here, 114,000 affordable housing units, and they've been able to help generate only about 5,000 or just over 5,000. And that's confirmed by the housing minister in this. And a big issue is around red tape. And I believe, quickly looking through this report, that's one of the things that's addressed too. So I think it's very important that we look at eliminating that red tape, reducing taxes and development fees to incentivize businesses to invest, to build housing, to build affordable housing. Would the minister agree with me that that's probably a direction that the government should be looking at going?
Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think it's really important to, first of all, recognize that supply alone isn't necessarily how to think about this problem. I think it's about right supply. I think it's about right supply. You know, in my community in Coquitlam, it's a very, if you can imagine, it's a very traditional suburb. It doesn't get more suburban than Coquitlam in many ways. Lots of single family, just tons of single family. Kids, and the reason my husband and I purchased our home there is because kids were playing street hockey, were playing road hockey. And that's what he and I grew up with. We both grew up in suburbia. And the thing with suburbia is there's a lot of single family. And certainly built out in my community, Coquitlam-Millardville, through the 50s. Most of the housing built was in the 50s, and then later in the 70s, and then in the 80s. And that was really all you could get there, was just a single family home. And then word was that we were going to get the Never Green Line. That's sort of an old joke. Became the Evergreen Line. And that really put significant pressure on what to do around where the stations were going to be. And so they started to build condo towers. Investment kept pouring in into our community. So what they were building, because it was an investment, the appetite was for investment and speculation, was towers that had, hundreds of units that were about 600 to 800 square feet, and I would say, dozens of these buildings. And so now we have come to learn that a lot of those were speculative, right? That the message that came through when I was sitting at that council table was, this is what the market demands, and so we're going to, we're just going to respond to the market. Well, the market was a speculative market. It wasn't for people wanting to raise a family. It wasn't for people downsizing. It was for a speculative market because you could get in at the ground floor, so to speak, also at the 18th floor, the 22nd floor, but you can get it on the ground floor in this investment. You could flip it several times, because those were the days that you could do that, and make good money, and then you could even let it sit empty and just wait till things, the market picked up even more, and then make a killing. And what you were killing was the next generation who couldn't afford to get in. And so when the member talks about supply, I think it's important that we talk about the right supply. We're building housing for people, not for speculation, and I would even argue not for investment. Now, if somebody wants to invest in housing and rent it out, for sure. But not just to make money. These are homes. Where are our workers going to live? Where are our children going to live? And so whenever we talk supply, I think it's incumbent on us as legislators to talk about the right supply. Who are we building for? So it's with that in mind that I do want to speak to how we are looking at supply, because I do think it's important. I also think it's important to recognize that when we formed government in April, it was July, I think, 2017, but we went back to take a look at how much housing was being developed by the previous government, and they had 2,000 homes in development or under construction. 2,000. Okay, nice attempt. Housing crisis, 2,000. We have over 10 times that, 21,000. And thousands more are open. I'm just talking about what's under construction or in development. That's a significant boost in investment, Mr. Speaker. That's a significant boost. Now, if we could build housing with just a little bewitched wiggle of my nose, that would be great. We are getting better at it. We're seeing modular construction that builds housing more quickly, and there's a project actually in Grand Forks, a townhouse project that was built modularly, and that went up, I think, in 9 months, which was pretty exciting. But it does take a couple of years, and part of the problem is the member calls it red tape. The development approval process is a significant process. It's certainly something that we were taking a look at, and I know that the new minister is continuing to take a look at and moving actively on it with local government partners. I know the member was a mayor and understands what development approval processes looks like, and so there is work underway to address that, to make it more efficient, to make it more work more smoothly, identifying ways that we could, fast track. I see there's another member in the House who was a mayor. So I know that there's lots of local government representatives here. I see another member who's here who was a city councillor. So we are, I think, familiar with that process. And so government is continuing to undertake a review to identify how to best make things move faster. The other thing, before I take my seat, is that there is more under construction now than in the last number of years, every single year. There are historical highs for housing starts, and that's significant as well, because it is about getting supply. But again, I want to qualify the right supply, and that's very much what our housing needs assessment was about: is making sure that local governments understood what their current supply was, who's coming into their community, what are they anticipating they're going to need, so that they could make sure that they're building the kind of housing that people need, because we're building housing for people.
Member for Kamloops South Thompson. North.
Yes,
beautiful North.
Yes, the sunny side. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's what it is. It's north side. It's more sun. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to take the minister back to this report. It's an expert panel report, but it's an expert panel report chaired by a former, some would very easily say, a distinguished legislator from this chamber that represented the NDP for a great many years with distinction. Definitely understands politics of reports like this. Was a social service minister, was a labor minister, was an education minister, was a health minister, pretty big portfolio, was the finance minister, was the deputy premier, and was even the leader of the opposition. So that's who the chair of this report, expert report is. Pretty close ties and connections to this current government, and ideologically aligned as well. I don't think that's a big shock to anyone. The member from Peace River South had asked the minister previously if the minister had been briefed, had an advance discussion, or anyone in the government, staff or other ministers, had been briefed on this report ahead of its release today, so that government could start to formulate a response. That would not be an unreasonable expectation on an expert panel report that's going to be coming out. I heard a 12-minute response that touched on just about everything but the question about getting a brief, except for a brief reference, slight reference, to a stack of documents on the side of my desk that I haven't gotten to. That was not the question. Was the minister, was the government, was anyone within government briefed in advance, given notification in advance, have any understanding in advance of what was going to be in this report when it was released today?
Minister.
Thank you very much. Just through you, Chair, to the member from Kamloops North, Thompson, the sunny side of Kamloops. I'll always remember that now. Staff did receive a draft of this independent panel's report back in, I believe it was February. 3 ministers, myself, the Minister for Municipal Affairs and Housing, had a very high-level briefing back, we believe it's March, I'd have to double-check, from the chair, from Joy MacPhail. It was very, very high level. They were letting us know, a bit about what they'd done, what they were thinking, what they were hearing, and giving us a bit of a timeline about when they expected. But it also depended on working with the federal government because it was a joint group that they also had to report out to CMHC. So they were briefing both governments and letting us know what a general sense of what their timeline was. That was, I believe, it was back in March, but I'd have to double check to get a specific date if the member is looking for that.
Member.
Thank you for that. Through you, Chair, to the Minister, was there anything fundamentally different then in that briefing, and particularly around the recommendations around the homeowner grant or the capital gains on your primary residence that's different from that high-level briefing to the actual final detailed language in the report?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, and it is difficult to recall, so we are looking at sort of early drafts. There was a mention of the homeowner grant and the capital gains, but they hadn't really drilled down in terms of the detail. They recognized that these were things that could be addressed, but they didn't have any specificity to them in their early drafts.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, it's important because people are already on edge about homeowners grants. And I think the minister can appreciate that. The minister was a former housing minister as well. My inbox is flooded in Kamloops right now, especially by seniors. I'm sure almost every member in this House is having the same experience across this province because of the province's decision to take over the administration of the homeowner grant instead of you just applying for it through the regular way through a municipality. Makes it difficult for seniors that have never done it that way, aren't tech savvy, don't necessarily have the help, all of those things. And I think the minister can appreciate that. And that was in December, I believe, those changes happened. And here we are in March with a briefing starting to talk about that as well. And in December, there was concerns and worry that this would be an easier way for the province to eliminate the homeowners grant. And now we have a report that's recommending that by somebody that used to hold the highest positions within NDP governments as the chair of the committee. So there was discussion at a high level in a briefing with very high level ministers of this current government. Was there a government discussion then? Was there a government position formulated at that point? Can the minister confirm? I know it's been asked already, but can the minister confirm one more time that it is the government's position, this current government's position, that there will not be the removal of the homeowners grant for British Columbians? Full stop. Not a reduction, not a reworking of the calculation. It will not be messed with.
Thank you very much. I have been saying this all along, that this recommendation is not at all under consideration. We said we would not be changing the homeowners grant. We've been saying that back, I believe it was December, and we continue to hold that position.
Member.
Thank you. And that was actually my error. It was actually March that change happened, and that would align when the briefing was happening as well. In that same time frame. So I think the minister can appreciate why there starts to be a little cynicism and worry by not just this side of the House, but by many residents in British Columbia as to what the actual end goal really is when some of these changes come forward, now that we're hearing that high-level briefings were taking place around a recommendation that was ultimately going to recommend the removal of the homeowner grant. At the same time, a massive fundamental change to how it will be administered was being pushed through the House at the same time. Now, another recommendation that was a part of that high-level briefing was about a capital gains tax on the sale of your primary residence. That stands to be dramatically punitive to people trying to sell and move for legitimate work reasons or whichever reason. They're moving from one primary house to another primary house. As soon as you sell that primary house, by the sounds of it, you're going to trigger a whole other tax bill. Not the property transfer tax, but a capital gains tax, if you happen to sell it for more than you bought it for. And that's what most people strive to do, is actually sell their house for more than they bought it for. The minister, just in a previous answer, talking about supply, actually said, would argue houses should not be for investment. Yet we have a recommendation here to apply capital gains to your primary residence. That sounds like an investment to me. It's the biggest investment most people make in their lives, is buying their home. The recommendation is, if they have the gall to buy a house, live in it for a number of years, and sell it for more than they paid for it, they should pay a tax over and above that. Now, I'm assuming, Mr. Chair, that the government ministers involved in that high-level briefing would have had further discussions about what the government's position would be if a recommendation like this was to come to pass, and it was part of that briefing. Through you, Chair, to the minister, what is the official government position about a capital gains tax on your primary residence?
Minister.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, the member is, I think, first of all, the capital gains is a federal responsibility. And the CMHC has already come out with a press release saying that they're not interested in changing the rules around capital gains. So I think that line of questioning I would suggest is moot. He's not quite capturing my words and my intent when I talk about purchasing homes that are not your primary residence for the purpose of investment and letting them sit empty. And that's what the speculation vacancy tax is about. Making sure that if you are going to invest in real estate, that at a minimum you need to rent out the home. That's what the intent of my response was. If the member didn't fully capture that, then I'm hoping that my clarification is well understood now.
Member Kamloops North Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, we sure have a lot of finger pointing back to Ottawa, and it's not our responsibility coming from the other side of the House these days. That didn't seem to be a problem when it came to Trans Mountain Pipeline. Every tool in the toolbox was going to be used by the side. We went to court how many times? Lost every single time. Spent untold dollars, because the government won't divulge that, to push back against Ottawa. And that's a government's right to do that. I didn't agree with it, but it's a government's right to do it. In fact, British Columbians expect their provincial government to stand up for their interests. We would expect that on cruise ships. We would expect that on softwood lumber. We would expect that on anything that might happen federally that would create undue impact on British Columbians, especially if it was contrary to what a sitting government thought was the right policy move for British Columbians. So again, the question wasn't what Ottawa thinks about a capital gains tax on their primary residence. The question was what this government's position on that type of policy is, and if it's that it should not happen, what type of advocacy. The Premier has spent millions of dollars for intergovernmental relations in his office. We're starting to really have a hard time figuring out what that office even does for those millions of dollars, because every time we ask a question that might fall under federal jurisdiction, we get a shrug and we get told it's not really our problem. Surely that side of the House, with I've lost count of how many MLAs used to be MPs, understands how Ottawa works. So again, what is the government's position? This is a concept that was provided in a high-level briefing note in March to all the relevant ministers in this government about the concept of capital gains tax on primary residence. It is simply not good enough for this government, Mr. Chair, to say, we haven't really thought about it, it's not our problem, it's Ottawa that would bring it in. What is the position of this government after that briefing on capital gains on primary residence, and if it's that they should not happen, what advocacy are they doing to ensure that happens at a federal level?
Minister of Finance.
Much. It's nice to see you in the chair, Mr. Speaker, and it's really unfortunate that the member from Kamloops North Thompson, the sunny side of Kamloops, doesn't seem to have brought a sunny disposition with him here today, which is really unfortunate, because we have had great dialogue here, and perhaps he didn't hear my response when CMHC has come out with a press release saying they are not interested in changing their position on the capital gains, that there's zero appetite by the federal government, and so there is nothing to advocate for, because the capital gains isn't going to change, and neither is the homeowner grant treatment going to change.
Kamloops North Thompson.
Thank you. Well, again, that's what the CMHC is today. We're not sure what they might say in a week or a month. We're not sure what might happen in a federal election. That seems to be imminent. MPs all over the place are doing farewell speeches in Ottawa. The question, though, that the minister has still failed to answer is, what is the government's position in regards, their official position in regards to capital gains tax on your primary residence? Does this government want to see a policy like that enacted, or is this government steadfastly opposed to capital gains on your primary residence, and they are going to push back if there's any hint of the CMHC actually enacting what is in this report?
Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much. And I just got some clarification that the report went to CMHC, but the press release actually came from Minister Friedland's office, the federal finance minister, who was very clear that the federal government had zero appetite to make any changes to the capital gains, and I'm pleased to hear that. Because I think that's the right decision on their behalf. But I also don't want to suggest that that it is my responsibility to, it's my responsibility to advocate and to lobby that there's nothing to lobby about here. Like to spend time trying to get the federal government to do something when they've already stated their position is not a good use of my time. It's not a good use of any relationship work that we continue to do. And so it doesn't make any sense except to say perhaps a thank you note. It's the right decision. Glad to see that you made that commitment, and I'll be sure to do so when we get out of this chamber today.
Member.
Thank you. Well, again, the minister's not actually answering the question. She said that she thinks it's a good decision. It was a high-level briefing on a concept that was going to be in a report in March by all the main ministers that would need to be involved provincially on a wide range of topics. But this topic in particular was touched on and briefed. And by the minister's own answer earlier on, Mr. Chair, things changed, wording changed, detail got added after that briefing. So the broad concept, though, the minister said, was there in the briefing. So surely one would hope the government, ministers involved, would have had a discussion after that briefing. There's not much point having a briefing on what government's response would be to certain things within the report if they come to pass. We now know that the concept that was briefed around a capital gains tax, a federal capital gains tax on your primary residence that was referenced in the briefing actually did come out as an actual suggestion today from that report. The question is, did the government, in advance of the report being released, based on that briefing, based on concerns potentially around a capital gains tax on your primary residence, formulate an official position in anticipation of this report? And if so, what is the official position of the government? Is the official position of the government of British Columbia, based on all of this background that they were getting, that there should not be a capital gains on your primary tax on your primary residence, or are they silent on the issue? There's a big difference between saying you think now the minister is making the right call in Ottawa and actually developing some sort of policy response in advance of a report that you were briefed on 2.5 months ago, 3 months ago.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And so to the member from the sunny side of Kamloops, North Thompson. Again, this was an independent report. The two of the recommendations that the member has raised, the federal finance minister and myself, we said, well, we're not going to act on two of the recommendations, that we have no appetite for either of those recommendations. I think it's the right decision on the federal government's part, and I know it's the right decision on our part in terms of what our responsibilities are. I think that's good for homeowners, and I look forward to taking a look at the other recommendations. I know that my colleagues are interested in some of the other recommendations as we, now that we see some of the details in the report, there might be some things for us to learn. But again, this is in the context of actions that we've already taken with our 30-point plan. It talks about the housing needs assessment and acknowledges the important work that we've already taken, the important steps that we have already taken to address this. Again, Mr. Speaker, that's making a difference in understanding what's on the ground, what kind of housing we have, what kind of stock, what kind of supply, that's really what's really important. And there are some other interesting recommendations in here around how to, the member from Peace River was talking about red tape and the development approval process. And there's some interesting recommendations in here about how to address that and move that forward. There's interesting recommendations around how to work collaboratively when we do infrastructure investments and looking at OCP zoning bylaws and other policies that increasing density. So there's a ton of work that has gone in here. Again, I want to thank all the members, and the member might not be aware about who is on this independent panel. We had Jill Atkish from the Nonprofit Housing Association. She's an incredible advocate, but also knows her stuff, knows what the needs are, knows how to represent her members really well. We have Jock Finlayson, Brian McCauley, Sue Patient, and Helmut Pastrick. They were tasked by the federal government and by ours to come up with, be creative, go out and check in with the experts about what more should be considered, should be reviewed. And the member mentioned two recommendations, and both the federal minister and I have said no to two recommendations. I think fair enough. We do get to do that. The other ones we're going to be looking at and identifying. Some of them we may accept. We may accept wholeheartedly. Some of them we may take a look at and say, you know what, this works, but this part doesn't, because of other work that is being undertaken, or as we understand what the implications are, what some unintended consequences might be. So all that work needs to go forward. This is, now that we have the final report, we can dig into it. And there's three ministers, myself, the Minister for Municipal Affairs, and the Minister of Housing, who have components in this. And so we'll be working together with our staff to identify, again, how to bring to bear various tools to address the housing crisis. And I don't know if the member is going to be satisfied with the answer, may or may not, don't know, but I can't be clearer around our commitment to say no to these two recommendations. We're going to be looking at the other recommendations, and there might be some more no's. I'm not discounting that. Because now that we see the details of these other ones, we'll have an opportunity to see if they work, if they make sense, how they fit with other work that we're doing. It is a complex landscape, the housing landscape, and I'm pleased with the work that we continue to do with my colleague, the Minister of Housing, and the Minister for Municipal Affairs, because we recognize that all of these three ministries need to work together in order to address housing affordability. We're committed to continue doing that. And in this report, the thing I do want to say about this report is having the federal government have the same report is very helpful because they understand what we're doing here in British Columbia, and that's good for British Columbians. And as well, there's a significant component about the role that local governments have. They too have a responsibility to address housing affordability, and that's a good thing in this report, bringing all orders of government together in order to address a complex problem, and I look forward to working with those partners in the months and in the years ahead.
Member for Shuswap.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. Through you, Honourable Speaker, to the Minister, I was recently asking a number of questions in the Ministry of Transportation. And for BCIB, BC Infrastructure Benefits, the Minister of Transportation indicated that the responsibility for BCIB falls within the Ministry of Finance. And so I've got a series of questions around that. Just to get started, just wondering if the Minister might be able to provide us with a bit of financial detail. What was the operating budget for BCIB for fiscal 2019-2020, and what is the budgeted gross operating budget for 2021?
Member for Peace River South. Would you mind approaching the chair, please? Thanks. Minister.
Thank you very much. Forecast for 2021 we have 17.1, and for 1920 we have 9 million.
Member for Shuswap.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. The Minister of Transportation had indicated that there is a report that is due to be put out by BCIB this summer. Through you, Honourable Speaker, to the Minister, can the Minister confirm if this will be the first report out from BCIB, or was a report put out last year?
Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm wondering if the member can just be a bit more specific, because there's numerous reports that BCIB reports out on, and I just want to make sure I give him the correct information.
Member for Shuswap.
Thank you. Yeah, my line of questioning with the Minister of Transportation was around the report out on craft hours, percentages of female hires, percentage of Indigenous peoples. So it's the reporting out of craft hours associated with specific projects that fall under the CBA regime.
Minister. Not yet. Minister, part two.
Thank you. I think I have all the information, and someone says, no, you can. There's also this. So it's. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So I believe the member is speaking about the annual report from last year's service plan that comes out in July, and that's about the deliverables from last year, and so that will be coming out in July.
Shuswap.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Earlier this year, there was a report that was put out by the Community Savings Credit Union. The report was titled Building a Better BC, Social and Economic Impact of the Community Benefits Agreement. The report that was undertaken includes a significant amount of detailed analysis and information that I can only assume would have had to have come from government. Through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, can the Minister advise this House what information was specifically shared with the Community Savings and Credit Union in the formulation of this third-party report? I'm increasingly concerned that we have not been able to get access to a lot of the information that is apparently now going to be put out in a service plan report in the summer of this year, and yet it appears that the information was readily shared with the Community Savings Credit Union to allow them to formulate this propaganda piece that was put out earlier this year.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'm happy to provide a response, and I'm going to ask if we could take a 5-minute break after my response. That would be most grateful. This report was undertaken by an independent contractor. They used a variety of sources to gather their information to create this independent report.
Sure. Member for Shuswap.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. I have to leave, but I do have a series of questions relating to BCIB, and I was just wondering, through you, Honourable Speaker, to the Minister, if it would be all right if I was to send in a list of questions and you'd be providing an answer back in the next couple of weeks or something like that. Would that be reasonable?
Minister. We will take a 5-minute recess, convening at 3:05. Calling the House back to order. Peace River South.
I appreciate my colleagues who asked some questions too, and appreciate the minister's offer to accept his questions in writing and respond back to him hopefully within a few weeks. It's important information, and as the minister I think can acknowledge, we don't always have all the time we need to ask every question in the House, and sometimes that more formal, I guess, response is appreciated in the form of letters and answers. I want to change gears here, if I can now, to something that's, I think this will be no surprise to the minister, let's just say. There's a lot of commentary right now in the media. I've received a lot of emails and social media response, and this is around the discontinuation of the school tax. Cuts, I'll use if I can say that. First of all, let me just put on the record too. So, the CFIB, for instance, is calling on the BC government to take the following actions. Reduce the school tax in 2021, calendar year, that the average business sees a 25% reduction in their overall property tax bill. Give businesses more flexibility to make payments by deferring provincial taxes, including but not limited to the employer's health tax, provincial sales tax, and carbon tax, and stop all tax increases planned for the 2021 calendar year, starting with the deferral and introduction of the PST and soda beverages on April 1st. Of course, we're past that, and the government has implemented that. Defer the carbon tax increase from $40 to $45 on April 1st. Well, we've passed that date, and unfortunately, changes have been made. But the school tax decrease, I'm interested from listening to the minister, the reasoning. That school tax decrease was in 2020. If my memory serves accurately on this issue, it was because the government says, look, we need to help our businesses. I support that, applaud that, agreed with that. They said it was because we were in a COVID-19 crisis, pandemic, which I think we all acknowledged as well. I'm curious if through this section of the dialogue that the minister and I will have, maybe we'll just start by asking what's changed. As of yesterday or a few days ago, the commentary that we've heard in this House from most ministers during estimates, and including the Premier during estimates and even during question periods, has said we're not done. We're still in a global pandemic. We're still dealing with a COVID-19 crisis. So if that's the case, why did the Ministry of Finance decide to stop the support for small businesses through this tax reduction and implement it again for 2021, which is in part, as everybody's acknowledged in this House, we're still going through a COVID-19 crisis?
Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The thing about this pandemic is that it's continually changing, and as a government, so is our response. And so I want to take the member back to last year, back in March, when we didn't know exactly how this pandemic was going to take shape. We knew that people were dying. We knew that people were getting sick. Everyone was scared. We knew that we could no longer have contact with each other. We hadn't yet, we weren't wearing masks. We were washing our groceries. We were, trying to understand. The scientists certainly were trying to understand what was going on. There was no vaccine. It was a very, very different kind of time, and it was in that context that the previous minister in the previous iteration of our government made the bold decision to help businesses by reducing the school taxes so that businesses could get through the rest of the year. But the member asks, what's changed since then? Well, Mr. Speaker, a lot has changed. Our understanding of this pandemic has changed. Our understanding about how to take care of ourselves and keep each other safe, that's changed. We now have vaccines. That's changed. We now have hope. That's changed. And so has our response, Mr. Speaker. Our response has changed as well. In fact, our response has changed partly because that's what we heard from experts about how do we continue to help the economy through this next piece. And we heard this from the Economic Forecast Council. I want to refer back, the member from Peace River South was there. He listened in on the discussion that I hosted with about a dozen economists who were taking a look at, and advising government about what needed to change given the changing nature of the pandemic and the change in the economy. And so we took their advice to heart. And so when we reduced school taxes, well over a year ago, it was because we needed a broad-based support, and that is a broad-based support. And that was $720 million that the Treasury did not receive in order to keep those resources in communities and with businesses. And we recognized that was needed at the time. And it was also the time that we provided a $1,000 worker benefit. It went to over 600,000 British Columbians whose jobs were impacted. And again, it was just about to help people stay afloat as best we could. We also had a rent supplement program that went on for a number of months. I believe it was 5 months in total, because we wanted to sort of see people through. But the thing that was really, I think, fascinating for me as a British Columbian and fascinating for me as a finance minister is how businesses pivoted, how people pivoted, how they took care of each other, how they keep taking care of each other. And what we've seen as a result of the resilience of British Columbians and the resilience of their businesses and the resilience of communities, Mr. Speaker, is we have seen employment numbers rebound in such a significant way. We're at 99% today of what it was last February, before the pandemic. And so that's changed, because that wasn't the case back in March and April of last year. That's when we saw the biggest dip ever needed a significant broad-based response from government. And so what we've been doing is engaging with the business community. We've been taking the advice of the Economic Forecast Council, and we've been tailoring our response to the specific needs. Because the other thing that we've learned from this pandemic is that not all businesses were impacted in the same way. And we know that there are some businesses that have been doing quite well, that really didn't have much impact. They've been able to pivot. They've been able to support their employees to work from home, for example, and continue to do the work that they do. We've also seen some industries where there's been continued ongoing challenges. So the tourism industry, for example, Mr. Speaker, the hospitality industry was significantly impacted. So we have the small and medium-sized business grants. So rather than a broad-based tax break that's attached to the school tax, we pivoted to, just like businesses had to pivot, and we pivoted to target those supports to those that need it. And so that's why we had have the small and medium-sized business grant. It's also why we put in the circuit breaker grant when we had to do the circuit breaker, when the public health officer said, restaurants, you can no longer continue, our numbers are going up, and we needed to take quick action. And so together with my colleague from Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation, the recommendation was to do a grant for those specific industries that were hardest hit, and then we extended it and we included the hospitality component, not just sort of restaurants, because there was a bigger hit to them. So again, pivoting as the pandemic continued to move, and we have $120 million allocated to support the tourism recovery, recognizing that the devastation for them. So as a government, we're being responsive to the changing needs of people and businesses as the pandemic continues to shift and change and move. And we're going to continue to adapt as needed.
Member.
Thank you. Appreciate the lengthy response, and wouldn't mind, on some of these, we'll try to fit in some questions here, but while we have limited time left, I think what hasn't changed, though, in a lot of ways, is that there are a lot of restaurants, a lot of businesses, especially people with triple net lease, a lot of small mom and pop operations that are still struggling. I won't ask the minister to put on the record, because I will, a very obvious comment that fiscal years that we deal with here in government do not match up with a calendar year, which is property taxation and school taxation. So from January 1st to December 31st is when people are looking at the taxes that they have to pay for property taxes. So that doesn't match up with what we do here. So we're actually halfway through the year, Mr. Chair. We're halfway through the year of taxation of what we're discussing right now. People have received their assessments. They're expected to pay their property tax by July 2nd. So we're actually halfway through the year. For the first half of 2021, a good portion of businesses were not operating, or they were struggling. They were figuring out how to stay afloat. And as the minister says, we might have hope, and hopefully we all have hope, but hope doesn't pay the bills. Hope doesn't actually put money in the bank account, bring people into your business to afford the taxes that this government has put on. I am sure that most businesses, if not all businesses, that were able to partake in the fact that they were able to save money last year because of the reduction in school taxes, were appreciative of that. I'm hearing from a good chunk of them now, though, saying our financial circumstances have not changed. Everybody keeps saying we're in the middle of a global pandemic. My restaurant was shut down for a good chunk of the first half of 2021. I've got one here, is even in, I've got lots of them, but even as of today in Global News reporting of one specific restaurant, and of course there's tens of thousands of them, but one specific restaurant in Vancouver, the co-owner of the Bonjour Vietnamese Bistro in Vancouver on Fraser Street starts off by saying how insensitive, quote unquote, it is of this government, and how, again in quotations, they were in shock. Actually saw my tax bill and I assumed it was a mistake. I'm just disappointed when I see this increase from this government, because we just closed indoor dining for the last 2 months. We were unable to have revenue. We are excited. They just reopened indoor dining a few weeks ago, but now they're stuck with a 45% tax increase. We're hearing businesses in the Lower Mainland who are being stuck because of triple net lease agreements that they have, with tens of thousands of dollars of increased taxes this year, which I think the minister would agree. It if we're still going through the pandemic, a lot of these businesses were not in a financial position to have that revenue coming in order to pay for this. I know the minister is saying, oh, some businesses were able to pivot, and we've used that word a lot. And those that were, I congratulate them, applaud them, and hope they have continued success. But a lot weren't able to. There's a lot where revenues are down. Their businesses might have even been closed for a good chunk of the 2021 calendar year so far, as we've heard from some who have been out there commentating that they're just basically clinging to life, hoping to survive, so when they are able to get back to pre-COVID revenues, that they'll be able to hire people back, that they'll be able to keep their doors open, and part of that means being able to afford to pay the taxes that are imposed on them from the government. I'm sure the minister's email has lit up like mine has over the last couple of weeks as the tax bills were coming in, where businesses are saying, we're still struggling. I had hoped the government would have seen that this is still an issue and would have considered extending this 25% reduction in the school tax portion at least until the end of the COVID-19 pandemic, which we all hope is sometime later this year, but I'm going to say that means a good portion of 2021 we are still going to be going through some form of reduction in business as we hope the economy starts to open back up. So maybe to the minister, and I know she has a colleague in close proximity who's been working on this, why was it not considered as part of the, let's say, the reopening plan or the recovery plan? Why was it not considered to have this reduction continued for this year, or in the very least a portion reduction, or maybe an incremental increase, but not the full increase back to pre-COVID levels, whilst companies, businesses are still struggling to pay the bills? It's a drastic increase when we're still in the pandemic. Why was this not considered to keep it at the 25% decrease as part of the recovery plan?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I was just listening closely to the member's question, and the business that he mentions, they actually got a circuit breaker grant. And I don't know the specific details, but I do know that they got a circuit breaker grant, and that would be a grant of up to about $20,000. Depends on how many employees. I don't have the specific details. I could get that for the member if he's interested. But a property tax relief would be about $5,500 maybe. So really the circuit breaker grant is certainly more substantive in terms of helping out this particular business. And on top of that, Mr. Speaker, on top of that, we've also allowed businesses to purchase alcohol at wholesale prices, saving them up to 20%. And we're helping them by making new patios permanent. So really, if you add these things together, the combination, they're actually they're better off with our targeted supports than if we had just done a broad-based reduction again. So, and I know that the member would appreciate, these targeted supports. On top of that, Mr. Speaker, with all of these elements, right, whether it's the tax relief and the grants in all its various forms, when you put them all together, we are providing the greatest amount of relief to businesses of anywhere in the nation. And on top of that, when you take a look and you compare across Canada, the province closest to us, we're still 30% more supports than the province next to us. So we are, and I'm very proud of the fact that we're very much head and shoulders above other provinces. And I think what that shows, the fact that we have 99% employment, that shows that it's working and it's the right direction. But again, there are others who have been saying, with all the supports that we've provided, whether it was tax relief or grant, we're hearing from the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, for example, just released today that 64% of businesses are optimistic about their economic prospects this year. We've helped to keep them afloat. I'm not saying it's 100%, it's 64%, but it's 2/3 of businesses. That's really, for me, gratifying to see. I know that there are still some businesses that are hurting, and we're going to continue working with them. We still have $120 million set aside for the tourism industry, recognizing that there's still some pieces that, with the public health orders and the prospect of a sufficient vaccination, that industry could get back on its feet. Timing is still a question, but that's still available to continue to support them. We've also heard of the Greater Vernon Chamber of Commerce, is saying that they're really excited about the summer ahead, and they're saying this is a significant boost for the tourism and hospitality sectors, certainly in their community, and certainly, and the Prince George Chamber of Commerce also just said earlier this week that the Prince George Chamber is excited for our business community to continue moving forward, particularly the hard-hit drink, food, and entertainment sectors. So there's absolutely hope in the business community. They recognize the investments that we continue to make to support them through this difficult time. They can see that light at the end of the tunnel that we've been talking about. The tunnel is shrinking every day. The more people that get vaccinated, the better for all of us, the better for our businesses, so that we can get back to life as we once knew it.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to, the Minister, I listened to her words carefully as well. I think what's interesting, though, and I will acknowledge from what I've read on this specific company, for instance, yes, they received a grant, and that grant barely covers the increase in the school tax. So I didn't know the intention of the circuit breaker grants were to actually give people money so they could give it back to the government. I thought the whole point of the circuit breaker grant was to give companies a lift, to help them so they didn't have to close, so they could hopefully keep employees, not to turn around and give the money to their accountant to say, oh, and by the way, we now have to just redirect and sign our circuit breaker check over to the government because we've got almost a $10,000 increase in our taxes because of the school tax increase. that they weren't expecting to pay, or they were hoping they wouldn't have to pay because they're still in the pandemic. So it's a little misleading in the sense of saying, but look at us, we're giving all these companies money to help them, and then in turn ask for that same money back. The net result is not really that beneficial to a company who's trying to stay afloat. And the minister, quoting organizations saying, 64% are hopeful. Well, I'm happy for those 64, but that means I'm very worried for almost the 40% of businesses who are not hopeful. That sounds like almost 40% of businesses are worried about where they see their future this year, whether they're going to be able to stay open, whether they're going to have to, unfortunately, maybe go bankrupt and lose everything, whether they're going to be able to employ people into the future. The minister continues to say for the last few days here about, and the same with other ministers, that we're almost to pre-pandemic levels of employment. They continue to not address everybody. They're talking about public sector, who is the public sector, and the minister can shake her head. Maybe I'll ask this question then. The numbers have been out, very public, in public documentation. This is not me making up these numbers. 61,000 people from the private sector, from pre-COVID levels, are not back to work yet. 61,000. So the minister can turn around and say, we're back to almost pre-COVID levels. But the government's done a lot of hiring internally, and I'm not taking away from that. That's a discussion for a different day. But the reports are out there, not my numbers, public, approved, documented numbers that 61,000 people are still unemployed from the start of the pandemic. Will the minister at least acknowledge that those are factual?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And no one on this side has ever said that we're done. No one has ever said that there isn't more to do. I want every single person who can work and contribute to be able to do that. So I don't think anyone on this side, I don't think any of my colleagues have ever said our work here is done, and we said, we can all take a break. I'm not taking a break for some time yet, even though today's the last day here in this House. I've got a ton of work to do over the coming weeks and months for sure, and I know that my colleagues here and around the cabinet table are still keeping their sleeves rolled up because there's absolutely more work to be done. That not everyone is going to come out of this pandemic unscathed. We don't want to leave anyone behind. And our government continues to work to find the right solutions to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to participate in the economy. And so when we talk of the 61,000 folks who continue to be challenged by this pandemic, we recognize that not all sectors are at 99%. There are sectors that have lower rates of employment. So the accommodation and food services is at 78.3% employment. The building and business support services is at 90.7%. We're keeping a close eye on these things, Mr. Speaker, but I also want to point out that there are other sectors where they have surpassed what the employment levels were like last February. So in the professional and scientific and technology sector, it's 116.4%. So that's, increased quite dramatically, Mr. Speaker. So we're keeping a close eye. We know that there's more to be done to support the tourism, the hospitality sector. We have set aside resources to help them. That's why, my colleague, the Minister for Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation, the Ministry for Tourism, Arts, Culture and Sport, they're working together to identify what additional supports are needed. We have set aside, as part of the budget, resources to help them, and we're working together with the sector, to identify how to best continue to support them so that they can get their businesses back on track and have a future that works well for them.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I want to thank the Minister. That is absolutely the closest acknowledgement we have heard yet in this House of acknowledging that there's 61,000 people from pre-pandemic numbers, 61,000 people who were employed, who lost their jobs, who are not back to work. So I respectfully say to the Minister and the other ministers and the Premier that they should stop with the narrative that we're back to pre-pandemic levels, because that's actually not a fair correlation of actually where we're at. And that's a disrespect to the 61,000 people who are sitting at home right now trying to find a job. So I want to thank the Minister for at least acknowledging somewhat in her answer that there are 61,000 people who are still struggling to find employment. We also need to remember, though, when the government talks about being back to pre-pandemic levels, that a lot of those are part-time jobs. A lot of those are people who are still struggling. They might be on a payroll somewhere. They might have a payroll number, but that does not mean that they have the hours that they had prior to. It means that there are some people out there still struggling. But I do thank the Minister for at least finally somebody in this House on the government side acknowledging that there are at least, and hopefully fewer every day, 61,000 people out there. But I just want to quickly go back to the Minister, if I could, because we haven't got, at least in my opinion, a fairly straight answer on the direction, other than it sounds like they're not going to look at any relief around the school tax credit. It appears from the Minister's answer that they have determined, and I think it's important just to have this on the record, because there's a lot of people who are waiting to see what the government's going to do about this. There's been a lot of commentary in the media. The Minister's seen the same commentary that I have. I know that there's a lot of struggling businesses out there. Another one that I got just a few days ago, a small mom-and-pop operation in West Vancouver, whose school tax portion of their property tax this year is going from $6,500 to $20,200 this year. From $6,500 to $20,200 in the same time when a lot of their business wasn't able to have revenue coming in. It sounds like the minister is not going to come up with many other opportunities for tax relief on the property taxes. I'll give her an opportunity to correct me if I'm wrong with that assumption based on her commentary. But maybe I'll ask her this, Mr. Chair. For a small business that's struggling to stay in operation, does she think that that's fair? $6,500 to $20,000 while we're still in the middle of a pandemic. Does the minister think that actually this company is expected to pay that amount and that she doesn't have any other tax relief on the school tax side to help them with this portion?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Again, to the members' early part of what then became a question, what didn't start off as a question, I just want to point out that we are certainly hearing and seeing that in some sectors there's a labor shortage. In some sectors like construction, they can't find skilled workers. That's a significant challenge, Mr. Speaker. We were just actually, the members were canvassing around housing supply, for example. And, we need to be and grapple with the fact that we need to make sure that there's people to actually build the housing that we need for people to live in. And that's a real challenge that I've certainly heard from the private sector. This is something that that our government is addressing as well, because we need to make sure that there are people with skilled trades in order to build the kind of housing that we need, to build the institutions that we need, to build the hospitals, all the hospitals. Man, are we building hospitals that we need? We are seeing, those sorts of challenges. We're also hearing, and I certainly have heard on the news about restaurants and small businesses not being able to find employees. People that perhaps had worked in the restaurant before, they had to close as a result of the pandemic, they've gone elsewhere to work. And so, there are opportunities for employment, and it's just different kinds of employment in different sectors. And so that's something that we're prepared to grapple with. We're prepared to work with the business community on, because we know that that's absolutely critical to moving forward. Now, to go to the question that the member did ask, again, was that, property tax relief, and it was relief, right? So the property tax system, has existed for a long time. And what we did when the pandemic hit was we did a broad-based $720 million tax relief program right across the province, recognizing that businesses were being challenged. But we heard from the economists that government consults with, the Economic Forecast Council, and they were very clear that targeted relief was what was needed now. That targeted relief, not broad relief, but targeted relief, it needed to be adapted. That yes, they still needed supports, but they needed targeted supports. And so that's what we did. We took their advice and we created a number of programs depending on what was happening with public health orders. And so that's why we put together the small and medium-sized business grant. That's why we did the circuit breaker grant, and if I recall, it was an eight-day turnaround. I'm just checking with my colleague, the Minister for Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation, and they have been getting that out into the hands of businesses that needed it most. And so that's really, the focus based on the best advice that was available to government in order to deliver to those businesses that needed it most.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. I know our time's unfortunately getting close to the end, as I somewhat joked with the Minister this morning about having a few more days worth of questions. Well, I definitely easily could have a few more days worth of question in finance. I know the leader of the official opposition could have easily gone for a few more days with questions with the Premier. And it's unfortunate her time was cut short as well, which was unfortunate because there's a lot of information that we just, I think it's important that we hold government account, but also for the people and citizens of British Columbia ask questions. I just want to go with that before I run out of time on a few things. To the Minister's comments just now that she made, look, I have a lot of friends a lot of good friends, fortunate enough to have, who own restaurants. And I've actually gone and met with them. I've asked, are you struggling to get employees? To the Minister's point. And they acknowledge, yes, absolutely. But the reason why we're struggling to get employees right now is because all we can offer is part-time. We can't offer certainty. And to a lot of friends that I have who work in the hospitality sector, a lot of them have chosen right now, and hopefully that changes and they go back, but a lot of them have chosen to not go back to working in restaurants or in the hospitality sector because of that uncertainty. It's been a roller coaster ride for them for the last 18 months. I'm not putting the roller coaster ride blame on government. We are in a pandemic. And there's decisions that are being made by the health minister, through the advice and from government, through the advice through Dr. Bonnie Henry. But it's also fair to say that uncertainty has created a lot of angst for people in the hospitality sector. So it is somewhat disingenuous to say that look, there's lots of opportunity out there when we also have that challenge in front of us. I think it's also important to recognize that the Minister and government have a lot of tools and opportunity here if they want to talk, as the Minister acknowledged in my commentary earlier, the 61,000 people in the private sector who are unemployed, and the Minister rightfully says in some areas people are starting to get back to work. Businesses are hoping and having to have that optimism of employing people back. But as we've seen in a lot of sectors, if you've lost your job for unfortunate reasons in the tourism sector and all of a sudden there's a job working at a mill or as a welder, Well, it's not compatible. Just because somebody's employed and there's job openings somewhere doesn't mean that there's the right skill set and people ready to fill those jobs. So maybe to the minister on that, well over $2 billion in funds for COVID relief and supports. $1.1 billion, I believe, in our discussion yesterday of contingencies for COVID supports that are not earmarked yet. Can the minister maybe determine then how much of that $1.1 billion in contingencies, if the minister's going to say all these people need to be retrained for the jobs that are coming, what's happening? Is she going to be able to draw on some of that money? Are people going to be able to apply now to get some short-term, immediate training now to try to get them into the workforce, maybe using some of that $1.1 billion in contingencies?
Minister.
Thank you very much. And I think it's important. I agree wholeheartedly about investing in skills training is absolutely critical. It's critical to our government. It's why in this budget we have $32 million allocated for skills training, another $36 million to support youth employment. We recognize that, and that's again an example of targeting where we saw gaps and where we see gaps. We're going to continue to invest in skills training because we know that that plays a big role in our recovery. It's very much top of mind for government, and I look forward to ongoing investments in the people here in British Columbia.
Member.
Well, thank you, Chair. And I believe this will probably be my last question. I'm getting the thumbs up from Government House Leader, who's obviously very anxious to get through some procedural stuff that needs to be dealt with in the House. I think I will end with a bit of a question and some commentary to allow the Minister the opportunity to close. I want to thank the Minister. I want to thank her staff, as we've joked about quite a bit, the voices in the Minister's head. At least she has an excuse. I don't have an earpiece for the voices in my head, but she has some great staff, and I want to thank them as well. And we have acknowledged through the course of estimates, and all of my colleagues have acknowledged through the course of estimates, the great work that the public service does. As we said, it was public service, I'm trying to remember, was it a week or month? But do want to acknowledge the great work that they do as well. I want to thank the Minister as well. We've had, I think, some very good dialogue, candid dialogue here, and some good information that we were able to extract, I guess. I don't know if that's the appropriate word, and that through that debate and conversation on the benefits of what's happening in British Columbia right now. And I share with the Minister, I believe, I know, the hope that we've talked about, that we are getting close to an end. As people and more people get vaccinated, and all the great numbers we're seeing right now for second vaccinations, and I know we all in this House are encouraging everyone to please do that. We want the economy to be reopened. We want people back to work. We want to see investment in British Columbia. We want to see cruise ships going back up, and the tourism sector back thriving, which is such a multi-billion dollar part of our economy. It's unfortunate I didn't get a chance in our timing to get into more specifics around that and some of the discussions that I wanted to cover around the PST rebate and why some groups were included and some were excluded. I think I will take the opportunity over the next while to possibly have those candid, maybe outside of this House, conversations with the Minister, because there is a lot still to cover. It's unfortunate that we didn't have enough time to get through all that. But I will just end, Mr. Chair, again for thanking the Minister and her staff for the last few days and for the information we've been able to share to help the people of British Columbia. Thank you.
Mr. of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I would like to take a moment, first of all, to thank the people that talked to me in my ear. They have done an outstanding job, and I don't know that the member from Peace River understands the coordination of the hybrid model and the fact that staff normally would be sitting behind me, and I've got a sheet of paper about who's where in which room, who's quarterbacking the call, and then there's different voices, and I don't know who's talking, and sometimes there's 2 or 3 voices, but they've been outstanding. And so I want to acknowledge and I want to thank Heather Wood, my Deputy Minister, for her quarterbacking skills in paying attention to who should be up and who should unmute and who should mute. And it's a significant amount of work. And I really express gratitude to all of the staff that have supported us in this debate. I want to thank the critic, the finance critic, for his thoughtful questions. They were good, solid questions, and I know that we're going to continue to have robust discussion about how to best support British Columbians through what I imagine is sort of the tail end of this pandemic. There's certainly more work to do on behalf of government, but on behalf of all members of the House. And I want to just say that I look forward to seeing everyone back here in the fall, fully vaccinated, without these pieces of cloth on our face. That would be really a wonderful opportunity for us all to get back together.
Thank you, Minister. And since everybody's in a thanking mode, I'd like to thank all the members of the legislature for the privilege and honor of being your chair and serving you over the last few months, and I wish you all a great summer. Actually reminds me of an Alice Cooper song, and I won't sing it here because the House Leader wants to go with the votes. I'd also like to thank all the staff that have been supporting us here in the legislature, and hope everybody has a safe summer. So on vote 26, we're about to have a vote. Please get your voting cards ready if you're joining us remotely. Those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Motion's carried. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I move vote number 27, be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $28,338,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of Ministry of Finance, Government Communications and Public Engagement to 31st of March 2022.
You've heard the motion. Those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Motion carried. Minister.
Vote number 28, be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $59,507,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of the Ministry of Finance, BC Public Service Agency to 31st of March 2022.
You've heard the motion. Those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carried. Minister.
Vote number 29, be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $1,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of the Ministry of Finance, benefits and other employment costs to 31st of March 2022.
You've heard the motion. Those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carried. Minister.
I've got vote number 44. Be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $1,339,774,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of management of public funds and debt, management of public funds and debt to 31st of March 2022.
You've heard the motion. Those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carried. Minister.
Got vote number 45. Be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $4,250,000,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of other appropriations, contingencies, all ministries, and new programs to 31st of March 2022.
You've heard the motion. Those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carried. Minister.
I vote number 46, be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $3,447,983,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of other appropriations capital funding to 31st of March 2022.
You've heard the motion. Those in favour indicate aye. Those opposed, nay. Motion carried. Minister.
I vote number 47, be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $1,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of other appropriations, commissions on collection of public funds to 31st of March 2022.
You've heard the motion. Those in favour indicate aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carried. Minister.
I vote number 48, be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $1,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of other appropriations, allowances for doubtful revenue accounts to 31st of March 2022.
You've heard the motion. Those in favour indicate aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carried. Minister.
I vote number 49, be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $1,871,000,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of other appropriations tax transfers to 31st of March 2022.
You've heard the motion. Those in favour indicate aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carried. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I move, vote number 1, be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $86,062,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of the Legislative Assembly.
You've heard the motion. Those in favour indicate aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carried. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I move vote number 2, be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $20,082,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of the officers of the Legislature Auditor General.
You've heard the motion. Those in favour indicate aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carried. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I move vote number 3, be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $738,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of officers of the Legislature, Conflict of Interest Commissioner.
You've heard the motion. Those in favour indicate aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carried. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I move vote number 4, be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $21,126,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of officers of the Legislature, Elections BC.
You've heard the motion. Those in favour indicate aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carried. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I move vote number 5, be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $6,815,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of officers of the Legislature, Human Rights Commissioner.
You've heard the motion. Those in favour indicate aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carried. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I move vote number 6, be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $7,589,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of officers of the Legislature, Information and Privacy Commissioner.
You've heard the motion. Those in favour indicate aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carried. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I move vote number 7, be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $1,377,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of officers of the Legislature, Merit Commissioner.
You've heard the motion. Those in favour indicate aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carried. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I move vote number 8, be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $10,802,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of officers of the Legislature, Ombudsperson.
You've heard the motion. Those in favour indicate aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carried. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I move vote number 9, be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $5,460,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of officers of the Legislature, Police Complaint Commissioner.
You've heard the motion. Those in favour indicate aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carried. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I move vote number 10, be it resolved that a sum not exceeding $10,641,000 be granted to Her Majesty to defray the expenses of officers of the Legislature, Representative for Children and Youth.
You've heard the motion. Those in favour indicate aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carried. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I move that the committee rise, report resolution and completion of the estimates of the Ministry of Finance, and further report resolution and completion of the estimates of the Legislative Assembly and officers of the Legislature, and ask leave to sit again.
You've heard the motion. Those in favour indicate aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carried.
Committee Chair.
Mr. Speaker, Committee of Supply, Section B, reports resolution and completion of the estimates of the Ministry of Finance, and further reports resolution and completion of the estimates of the Legislative Assembly and officers of the Legislature, and asks leave to sit again.
When shall the committee sit again, Government House Leader?
Next sitting.
So ordered. Committee Chair.
Mr. Speaker, Committee of Supply, Section A, reports resolution and completion of the estimates for the Ministry of Health, and asks leave to sit again.
When shall the committee sit again, Government House Leader?
Next sitting.
So ordered. Committee Chair.
Mr. Speaker, Committee of Supply, Section C, reports resolution and completion of the estimates of the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, and asks leave to sit again.
When shall the committee sit again, Government House Leader?
Next sitting.
So ordered. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I call for consideration of the resolutions from the Committee of Supply.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I move that the reports of resolutions from the Committee of Supply on May 11th, 12th, 13th, 17th, 18th, 20th, 31st, and June 1st, 3rd, 7th, 8th, 10th, 14th, and 17th be now received, taken as read, and agreed to.
Members, a vote is about to take place. Participating remotely, have your voting cards ready. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Those who oppose indicate nay. Motion carried. Minister of Finance.
Honourable Speaker, I move that there be granted to Her Majesty from and out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund the sum of $57,188,294,000 towards defraying the charges and expenses of the public service of the province for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022. The sum includes that authorized to be paid under Section 2 of the Supply Act No. 1, 2021.
Members, you heard the motion. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Those who oppose, motion carried. Minister of Finance.
Honourable Speaker, I move that there be granted to Her Majesty from and out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund the sum of $1,190,040,000 towards defraying the disbursements for capital expenditures, loans, investments, and other financing requirements of the province for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022. This sum includes that authorized to be paid under Section 3 of the Supply Act No. 1, 2021.
Again, members, you heard the motion. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Those who oppose, motion carried. Minister of Finance.
Honourable Speaker, I move that there be granted to Her Majesty from out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund the sum of $1,391,333,000 towards defraying the disbursements for revenue collected for and transferred to other entities for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022. This sum includes that authorized to be paid under Section 4 of the Supply Act No. 1, 2021.
Members, you heard the motion. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Minister of Finance.
Honourable Speaker, I have the honour to present a message from Her Honour, the Lieutenant Governor.
The Lieutenant Governor transmits herewith a bill entitled Supply Act 2021-2022 and recommends the same to the Legislative Assembly. Minister.
Honourable Speaker, I move that Bill 16 be introduced and read a first time now. Honourable Speaker, this supply bill is introduced to authorize funding for the operation of government programs for the 21-22 fiscal year. The House has already received, taken as read, and agreed to the reports of resolutions from the Committees of Supply after consideration of the main estimates. In addition, the House has resolved that there be granted from and out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund the necessary funds towards defraying the charges, expenses, and disbursements of the public service of the province for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022. Honourable Speaker, it is the intention of the government to proceed with all stages of the supply bill this day.
Members, you heard the motion. It's the first reading of the bill. Those in favour indicate aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Minister of Finance.
Honourable Speaker, I move that Bill 16 be read a second time now. You want to circulate?
Members, I ask the members to remain in your seats for a few minutes while the bill is being circulated and transmitted electronically to members participating remotely. Minister of Finance.
Thank you. Honourable Speaker, I move that Bill 16 be read a second time now.
Seeing no speakers, members, the vote is about to take place. It's the second reading of the bill. All those in favour indicate aye. Aye. Those who oppose, motion carried. Minister of Finance.
Honourable Speaker, I move that Bill 16 be committed to a committee of the whole House for consideration forthwith.
Again, members, you heard the motion. All those in favour indicate aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carried. Committee Chair.
All right, members. So here on Bill 16, on Clause 1, shall Clause 1 pass? So ordered. Shall Clause 2 pass? So ordered. Shall Clause 3 pass? So ordered. Shall Clause 4 pass? So ordered. Shall the first schedule pass? So ordered. Shall the second schedule pass? So ordered. Shall the preamble pass? So ordered. Shall the title pass? So ordered. Minister of Finance.
Honourable Chair, I move that the committee rise and report Bill 16 complete without amendment.
Members have heard the question. All those in favour, please indicate. Aye. Those opposed? Carried. We'll wait the arrival of the Speaker.
Committee Chair.
Committee on Bill 16 reports the bill complete without amendment.
When shall the bill be read a third time, Minister?
Now, Honourable Speaker.
Members, the vote is again to take place. All those who are participating remotely, yes. Members, we have to have the committee chair back again. Yes.
Thank you, members. We've got one more vote to do. Can't forget trustee schedule number 3. All right, shall schedule number 3 pass? Aye. So ordered. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chair, I move that the committee rise and report Bill 16 complete without amendment.
Now that it's really complete, are members in favour indicate aye. Aye. Those opposed? Carried.
I know people are anxious to go home, but we have to do it correctly. Committee Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Committee reports Bill 16 really complete and seeks leave to sit again. Oh, wait, no, we don't have to.
When shall the bill be read a third time, Minister?
Really now, Honourable Speaker.
Members, now the vote will take place. All those in favour indicate aye. Aye. Those who oppose, motion carried. Yeah. Members, Bill 16 has been read a third time and the bill has passed. Members, we are waiting for Her Honor, Lieutenant Governor. I am advised that he would be here fairly soon. So in the meantime, we will have the House in recess for a few minutes. Calling the House back to order, members. I'm advised that Her Honor is in and she should be here any minute. So in the meantime, just stay in your seats. We're waiting for her.
Budget Measures Implementation Act 2021, Accessible British Columbia Act, Electoral Boundaries Commission Amendment Act 2021, Public Safety and Solicitor General Statutes Amendment Act 2021, Municipal Affairs Statutes Amendment Act 2021, Miscellaneous Statutes Amendment Act 2021. In Her Majesty's name, Her Honour the Lieutenant Governor doth assent to these acts.
Supply Act 2021-2022. In Her Majesty's name, Her Honour the Lieutenant Governor doth thank Her Majesty's loyal subjects, accepts their benevolence, and assents to this act.
Splendid work. I will say Ait Squaichel, Stelata, Iquanis Quinangahela. Good day, friends. It's wonderful to be among you today. And I mean that so very sincerely. I thank you really from my heart for all that you've done over this past session. It represents, I think, an enormous amount of work. And I want to thank also all of the people who support you, those in your legislative and constituency offices, and also your friends and family who support you in your family and your lives in your communities. And I would be sadly remiss if I didn't also acknowledge the really splendid work of Clerk Kate Ryan Lloyd and her team, who have, I think, moved heaven and earth to keep the legislature functioning smoothly through a most challenging and crazy and unusual year. So thank you all so much. I do hope that you are, I know there's work ahead this summer as well, but I do hope you all have some time to relax and enjoy families and friends and get some, frankly, much needed downtime. And I look forward very much indeed to seeing you in the fall and hopefully welcoming you to Government House, where we can meet in person and have some social time together. Meanwhile, take good care, everyone. All the best. Thank you again.
Members, we have to take care of a couple of more items. But before we start that, I want to remind each and every one of you who had the privilege to sit in the chamber, please make sure you remove your personal items from your drawers. Otherwise, they will be gone forever. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And one additional thing, I think we should give the staff who support us in this chamber, in this building, a big round of applause for doing an amazing job. And I'd also be remiss if I don't give a big shout out to my ministerial assistant, Will Martman, who helped with the estimates process and get it organized. So, Will, you did a great job. Anyways, Honourable Speaker, with that, I move that the House at its rising do stand adjourned until it appears to the satisfaction of the Speaker, after consultation with the Government, that the public interest requires that the House shall meet, or until the Speaker may be advised by the Government that it is desired to prorogue the second session of the 42nd Parliament of the Province of British Columbia the Speaker shall give notice to all members that he is so satisfied or has been so advised, and thereupon the House shall meet at the time stated in such notice, and as the case may be, may transact its business as if it had been duly adjourned to that time and date. That by agreement of the Speaker and the House leaders of each recognized caucus, the location of sittings and means of conducting sittings of this House may be altered if required due to an emergency situation or public health measures, and that such agreement constitute the authorization of the House to proceed in the manner agreed to. The Speaker shall give notice to all members of the agreement and shall table it for it to be printed in the votes and proceedings of the House at the next sitting. That in the event of the Speaker being unable to act owing to illness or other cause, the Deputy Speaker shall act in his stead for the purpose of this order. In the event that the Deputy Speaker being unable to act owing to illness or other cause, the Deputy Chair of the Committee of the Whole shall act in his stead for the purpose of this order. And in the event that the Deputy Chair of the Committee of the Whole being unable to act owing to illness or other cause, another member designated collectively by the House leaders of each recognized caucus shall act in her stead for the purpose of this order.
Members, you heard the motion. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Those who oppose, motion carried. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I move the House now adjourn.
Members, now we'll take another vote. Be ready. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Those who oppose, motion carried. This House stands adjourned until further notice, and have a wonderful summer. Be safe. Thank you.